I kicked my mom out of my wedding after she faked losing her necklace to sabotage my big day. 3 months later, she tried to win me back but ended up revealing her true colors. I, 28F, recently married my husband Russell, 30M. We've been together for 5 years after meeting at work. I'm a nurse and he's a doctor. Our relationship hasn't always been easy, especially when it comes to my mom, Karen, 57F. Karen has always been overprotective and controlling. Growing up, I never really understood why she was the way she was. It wasn't until I was older that I learned about her troubled past. Karen came from a broken home, with an alcoholic father and a mother who was barely present. She'd often tell me stories of how she had to fend for herself from a young age, scrounging for food and taking care of her younger siblings. I think her difficult childhood is what led her to be so overbearing with me. When I was growing up, she micromanaged every aspect of my life: my clothes, my friends, my hobbies. Nothing I did was ever good enough for her. I remember one time in middle school, I got a B+ on a math test. Most parents would be proud, but not Karen. She grounded me for a week and made me study for hours every night until I could solve every problem perfectly. As I got older, her behavior only intensified. When I went off to college, I thought I'd finally have some freedom, but Karen had other plans. She'd show up unannounced at my dorm, sometimes driving hours just to surprise me. Once, she arrived at 6 a.m. on a Saturday, barging into my room and waking up my roommate. She claimed she was worried because I hadn't called her in 2 days. Karen also had strong opinions about my career choice. When I told her I wanted to be a nurse, she scoffed. She thought I should aim higher, become a doctor or a lawyer. For weeks, she bombarded me with information about other programs, trying to change my mind. But I stood firm. Nursing was my passion, and for once, I didn't let her sway me. Dating was another battleground. Karen tried to set me up with guys she approved of, usually sons of her friends or men she met at church. She'd arrange accidental meetings or invite them to family dinners without telling me. It was embarrassing and frustrating. I had a few relationships in college, but they never lasted long. Karen would always find a way to interfere, whether by constantly calling when she knew I was on a date or showing up uninvited when a boyfriend came to visit. When I met Russell, I thought things might finally change. He was successful, kind, and came from a good family. On paper, he was everything Karen had ever wanted for me. But somehow, she still found ways to nitpick him. She'd make snide comments about his long work hours or how he wasn't ambitious enough. Once, she even suggested he might be too handsome and would probably cheat on me. Russell tried his best to win her over. He'd bring her gifts, compliment her cooking, and always offer to help around her house when we visited. But nothing seemed to work. I remember one Thanksgiving, Russell spent hours helping Karen in the kitchen. He even used his grandmother's secret recipe to make a delicious pumpkin pie. Karen took one bite, declared it too sweet, and refused to eat anymore. Despite Karen's behavior, Russell and I grew closer. He was patient and understanding, always there to comfort me after a difficult interaction with my mom. When he proposed after 3 years of dating, it was one of the happiest moments of my life. But even that was tainted by Karen's reaction. Instead of congratulating us, her first words were, "Well, I suppose it's about time. You're not getting any younger, you know." Planning our wedding was a nightmare. Karen insisted on being involved in every decision, from the venue to the napkin colors. She'd call me multiple times a day with new ideas or complaints. I tried to include her where I could, but it was exhausting. One particularly stressful day stands out. We were choosing bridesmaid dresses, and I had my heart set on a beautiful pale blue. Karen insisted on a garish hot pink that none of my bridesmaids liked. When I stood my ground, she burst into tears in the middle of the bridal shop, wailing about how I was ruining her only daughter's wedding. The other customers stared as I tried to calm her down. In the end, I gave in just to keep the peace. Russell was supportive throughout it all, but I could tell the stress was getting to him too. There were nights when I'd find him sitting alone in the dark, looking exhausted. When I asked what was wrong, he'd just shake his head and say, "I'm fine, just tired." But I knew it was more than that. The constant drama with Karen was taking its toll on both of us. The day of the wedding finally arrived. I was a bundle of nerves, but excited to marry the love of my life. The morning started off relatively smoothly. My bridesmaids and I were getting ready, sipping champagne and laughing as we did each other's hair and makeup. For a moment, I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, the day would go off without a hitch. But of course, Karen had other plans. About an hour before the ceremony, she burst into my dressing room in hysterics, claiming her diamond necklace had been stolen. This wasn't just any necklace. It was a family heirloom passed down from her grandmother. Karen had made a big show of giving it to me the night before, saying it would be my something borrowed. I was stunned. Karen was sobbing dramatically, accusing the staff of theft and demanding we call the police. My bridesmaids and I tried to calm her down and help search, but she was adamant it had been stolen. As the minutes ticked by, I started to panic. We were supposed to be walking down the aisle soon, and instead we were dealing with this crisis. Russell came to check on me and immediately sensed something was wrong. When I explained the situation, a look of suspicion crossed his face. He asked to speak to Karen alone for a moment. I was confused but agreed, hoping he might be able to calm her down. A few minutes later, Russell emerged from the room looking furious. He was holding Karen's diamond necklace. Apparently, he'd had a hunch and searched her purse, where he found the necklace she claimed was stolen. I was in shock. Russell explained that he'd suspected Karen might try to sabotage the wedding somehow. He'd noticed her acting strangely all morning, whispering with relatives and giving me odd looks. When the necklace incident happened, it all clicked. Karen tried to deny it at first, claiming she must have forgotten she put it in her purse. But her excuses fell flat. Russell and I were livid. This was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, and she'd tried to ruin it with her theatrics. In that moment, all the years of dealing with Karen's manipulation and drama came crashing down on me. I thought about all the times she'd made me doubt myself, all the relationships she'd ruined, all the joy she'd sucked out of important moments in my life. I was done. I told Karen she needed to leave. She protested, crocodile tears streaming down her face. She tried every trick in her book: guilt, manipulation, playing the victim. But for once, I stood firm. Russell backed me up 100%, telling Karen that her behavior was unacceptable and she was no longer welcome at our wedding. We had security escort Karen out. She made a scene, wailing about how cruel and ungrateful I was. Some of our guests looked shocked, others uncomfortable. But in that moment, I didn't care what anyone thought. For the first time in my life, I was putting myself first. The ceremony went on an hour late, but it was beautiful. As I walked down the aisle and saw Russell waiting for me, I felt a sense of peace I'd never experienced before. We were finally married, and for once, Karen couldn't ruin it. It's been a week since the wedding, and I haven't spoken to Karen. She's been calling and texting nonstop, alternating between apologies and accusations. Part of me feels guilty for kicking my own mother out of my wedding, but a bigger part feels relieved to finally stand up to her. Russell thinks I did the right thing and says I shouldn't let her manipulate me anymore. My dad and siblings agree that Karen went too far this time, but some extended family members think I overreacted and should forgive her. I'm torn. I love my mom and want her in my life, but I'm tired of walking on eggshells around her. Was I wrong to kick her out? Should I try to reconcile or stick to my guns? I could use some outside perspective on this whole mess. Update 1. It's been about a month since my last post, and a lot has happened. First, thank you all for your supportive comments and advice. It really helped me gain some perspective on the situation with my mom. After much consideration, I decided to maintain low contact with Karen for the time being. I spent days agonizing over how to approach this. I drafted and redrafted countless emails, each time struggling to find the right words to express my feelings without completely burning bridges. Finally, I settled on a brief but firm message explaining that I needed space to process everything that happened. I made it clear that if we were to have a relationship moving forward, things would need to change. Karen didn't take it well. 3 days after I sent the email, she showed up at our apartment unannounced. Russell and I were having a quiet dinner when we heard frantic knocking at the door. When Russell answered, there was Karen, mascara streaking down her face as she cried and begged to talk to me. Russell, bless him, tried to handle the situation calmly. He politely but firmly asked Karen to leave, explaining that now wasn't a good time and that we'd reach out when we were ready. But Karen wasn't having it. She tried to push past Russell into the apartment, screaming my name and demanding I face her. I froze. All the old feelings of anxiety and fear came rushing back. I could hear Karen's voice getting more hysterical as Russell struggled to keep her out of the apartment. Finally, I found my voice and told Russell to call building security. The next few minutes were chaos. Karen was wailing, alternating between begging me to talk to her and hurling insults at Russell for turning me against her. Our neighbors started poking their heads out to see what the commotion was about. I was mortified. Finally, security arrived and escorted Karen out of the building. As they led her away, she shouted that I was breaking her heart and that she'd never forgive me for this betrayal. Her words stung, but they also solidified my resolve. This was exactly the kind of manipulative behavior I was trying to escape. That incident was the final push I needed. The next day, I blocked Karen's number and on all social media platforms. It was hard. Harder than I expected. There was a moment, my finger hovering over the block button, where I almost backed out. But then I remembered the scene from the night before and all the years of manipulation before that. And I knew it was the right choice. The next few weeks were strange. I kept expecting my phone to buzz with another message from Karen or to hear her knocking at the door again. But there was nothing. The silence was both a relief and unsettling. I hadn't realized how much mental energy I spent anticipating and managing Karen's moods and demands until suddenly I didn't have to anymore. Russell was incredibly supportive through it all. He'd hold me when I cried, listen patiently when I needed to vent, and distract me with silly jokes when he could tell I was dwelling on things too much. His unwavering support made me realize just how toxic my relationship with Karen had been. For the first time, I was experiencing what unconditional love and support really felt like. About 2 weeks after the incident at our apartment, my younger sister Megan, 25F, called me in tears. Apparently, Karen had been harassing her nonstop, demanding she convince me to forgive her. Megan was at her wits' end. We talked for hours, sharing stories of Karen's manipulative behavior over the years. Megan told me about times Karen had interfered in her life that I hadn't even known about, like when Megan got accepted to her dream college out of state, and Karen guilted her into going to a local school instead so she could take care of her aging mother. Or when Karen sabotaged Megan's relationship with her high school boyfriend because she thought he wasn't good enough for her daughter. It was eye-opening to realize how much Karen's actions had affected both of us. We'd both been so caught up in managing Karen's emotions and demands that we'd never really talked about it with each other. That night, Megan and I became closer than we'd ever been. Megan decided to join me in setting firm boundaries with Karen. We agreed to present a united front. It wasn't easy. Karen escalated her behavior, sending flying monkeys in the form of extended family members to guilt us into reconciliation. Aunts, uncles, and cousins started calling and messaging us, telling us how heartbroken Karen was and how we should forgive her because she's still your mother. Some were understanding when we explained the situation, but others accused us of being cruel and ungrateful. One particularly persistent aunt even showed up at my workplace, causing a scene in the hospital lobby as she demanded I speak to her about Karen. Security had to escort her out. I was embarrassed and angry, but also more certain than ever that I was making the right choice in distancing myself from this toxic family dynamic. Through it all, Megan and I stood our ground. We supported each other, venting our frustrations and reaffirming our decision whenever one of us started to waver. It was tough, but having each other made it bearable. Last week, things came to a head at a family dinner. My dad had organized it, hoping to smooth things over. He'd always been more of a passive figure in the family, often acting as a buffer between Karen and us kids. I was hesitant to go, but Megan convinced me it might be good to clear the air with the whole family. Karen showed up acting like nothing had happened. She breezed into the restaurant, air kissing everyone's cheeks and chatting about the weather as if the last month of drama hadn't occurred. When she got to me, she opened her arms for a hug, a bright fake smile plastered on her face. I stepped back, refusing to hug her or engage in small talk. That's when she lost it. The facade crumbled and she started screaming about how ungrateful and cruel her children were, how we were tearing the family apart. She accused Russell of poisoning me against her and said Megan was just jealous of our relationship. To my shock, my usually passive dad finally stood up to her. He told Karen that her behavior was unacceptable and that she needed to take responsibility for her actions. He said he'd been enabling her for years and it stopped now. Karen stormed out, leaving us all stunned. Later that night, Dad called to apologize for not intervening sooner. He admitted he'd known about Karen's necklace stunt beforehand, but was too afraid to confront her. We had a long, emotional talk about the years of dysfunction in our family. It was painful but cathartic. So now we're at a crossroads. Karen is still trying to worm her way back in through guilt and manipulation. But for the first time, the rest of the family is united in maintaining healthy boundaries. It's not easy, but it feels like a step in the right direction. Russell and I are focusing on enjoying newlywed life. We're planning a belated honeymoon for next month, something that would have been impossible with Karen's constant interference before. I'm learning to prioritize my own happiness and well-being. It's a work in progress, but I'm hopeful for the future. Update 2. It's been about 3 months since my last update, and the situation with my mom has taken some unexpected turns. Shortly after my last post, Karen seemed to have a change of heart. She sent a long email apologizing for her behavior at the wedding and throughout my life. She said she'd been doing some soul-searching and realized how toxic her actions had been. She asked for a chance to make amends and rebuild our relationship. I was skeptical at first, given her history of manipulation. The email was full of phrases that sounded promising. I realize now how much I've hurt you. I want to be a better mother. I'm ready to change. But I'd heard similar promises before, only to have Karen revert to her old behaviors as soon as she felt she had regained control. I spent days mulling over the email, rereading it countless times. Part of me wanted desperately to believe her, to have the loving, supportive mother I'd always longed for. But another part, the part that had been hurt too many times, was wary. I talked it over with Russell. He was understandably hesitant, given everything we'd been through. But he also said he'd support whatever decision I made. It's your mom, and your relationship, he told me. I'll back you up no matter what you choose. I also reached out to my therapist for an emergency session. We spent an hour dissecting the email and my feelings about it. She helped me set some clear boundaries and expectations if I decided to give Karen another chance. After much deliberation, I decided to cautiously give her a chance. I replied to her email, agreeing to meet for coffee in a public place. I made it clear that this was not an automatic forgiveness, but rather a chance for us to talk things through. The day of the meeting arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. Russell offered to come with me for moral support, but I decided this was something I needed to do on my own. As I walked into the coffee shop, I half expected to see the old Karen, ready with excuses and manipulation. But to my surprise, the woman sitting at the corner table looked different. Karen was subdued, her usual perfectly coiffed appearance slightly disheveled. She didn't jump up to hug me or launch into a monologue about how much she'd missed me. Instead, she offered a small smile and a quiet, "Thank you for coming." To my surprise, the meeting went okay. Karen listened more than she talked, which was a first. She didn't make excuses for her past behavior or try to guilt me. We had an honest conversation about our relationship and the hurt we'd both experienced. Karen shared some things about her own childhood that I'd never known before. She talked about her father's alcoholism and the emotional abuse she'd endured. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me understand where some of it came from. For the first time, I saw Karen as a flawed, damaged person rather than just my overbearing mother. Over the next few weeks, we had a few more meetings. Each time, Karen seemed to be making an effort to respect my boundaries and listen to my perspective. She even started seeing a therapist of her own, which was a huge step for her. I started to feel cautiously optimistic. Maybe, just maybe, we could build a healthier relationship. Russell was supportive, but reminded me to take things slow and keep my guard up. That just as I was starting to let my guard down, everything imploded. Russell and I had invited Karen over for dinner, thinking it might be time to try rebuilding our relationship in a more personal setting. At first, things were going well. Karen complimented our apartment and seemed genuinely interested in hearing about our lives. But as the night went on, Karen started slipping back into her old patterns. It started with subtle digs at my cooking and how I decorated our apartment. Then she began prying into our personal lives, asking invasive questions about when we planned to have kids. When I politely changed the subject, she got upset. The final straw came when Karen started criticizing Russell's career choices, saying he should be aiming for a more prestigious position. Russell, always the peacemaker, tried to deflect, but Karen wouldn't let it go. She started comparing Russell unfavorably to my cousin's husband, who had recently made partner at a law firm. I'd had enough. I told Karen that if she couldn't respect our boundaries and treat us with kindness, she needed to leave. She exploded, accusing me of being oversensitive and ungrateful. All the progress of the past few weeks evaporated in an instant. As Russell escorted Karen out, she turned to me and spat. "I should have known you'd never change. You've always been selfish and difficult, just like your father." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. In that moment, I realized that despite her apparent efforts, Karen hadn't really changed at all. She'd just gotten better at hiding her true nature for a while. After she left, Russell and I had a long talk. We decided that for our own mental health and the sake of our marriage, we needed to go no contact with Karen, at least for the foreseeable future. It's been hard. There are moments when I miss the idea of having a loving, supportive mother. But I'm learning to accept that the mother I wish I had doesn't exist. The real Karen is incapable of having a healthy relationship with me. For now, I'm focusing on healing and building a life filled with positive relationships. Russell has been my rock through all of this. We're looking forward to starting a family of our own someday. One built on love, respect, and healthy boundaries. Update 3. It's been 6 months since I last posted, and a lot has changed. The decision to go no contact with Karen was difficult, but ultimately the right choice for us. At first, Karen didn't respect our boundaries. She'd show up unannounced, leave long voicemails, and try to get family members to intervene on her behalf. It was stressful, but Russell and I stood firm. We changed our phone numbers, installed a security camera at our front door, and asked our families to respect our decision. About 2 months in, something unexpected happened. My cousin Sarah reached out to me. She'd been living with Karen for a while, helping her out after a minor surgery. Sarah had witnessed firsthand how Karen's behavior had escalated since our fallout. Over coffee, Sarah shared some disturbing stories. Karen had become increasingly paranoid, accusing neighbors of spying on her and claiming that Russell and I were part of a conspiracy against her. She'd stay up all night, pacing the house and muttering to herself. Once, Sarah woke up to find Karen in the backyard at 3 a.m., digging holes because she was convinced someone had buried listening devices in the garden. It was clear that Karen's issues went beyond just being manipulative. She needed professional help. Sarah and I spent hours talking, trying to figure out the best way to approach the situation. We knew Karen would resist any suggestion that she needed help, but we couldn't just stand by and watch her spiral. With Sarah's help, we were able to convince Karen to undergo a psychological evaluation. It wasn't easy. Karen initially accused us of trying to have her committed so we could steal her money. But after a particularly bad episode where she called the police on a delivery man she thought was an assassin, she finally agreed to see someone. The diagnosis was hard to hear. Borderline personality disorder with narcissistic traits. It explained so much about her behavior over the years, but it didn't excuse it. The psychiatrist recommended an intensive therapy program and medication. Karen initially resisted the idea of treatment. She cycled through denial, anger, and bargaining. She tried to convince us that the doctors were wrong, that she was fine, and we were the ones with problems. But after a particularly bad episode that resulted in her being briefly hospitalized, she finally agreed to enter a specialized therapy program. It's been a long road, and Karen still has a lot of work to do. But for the first time, she's actively trying to address her issues. She's been in therapy consistently and is on medication that seems to be helping stabilize her moods. Russell and I have cautiously allowed Karen back into our lives, but with very strict boundaries. We only meet in public places for short periods, and with a clear exit strategy if things go south. So far, she's been respecting our rules. Our relationship is different now. It's not the close mother daughter bond I once hoped for, but it's healthier than it's ever been. We're learning to communicate in new ways, to respect each other's boundaries, and to build a relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Through all of this, my relationship with Russell has only grown stronger. We've learned so much about communication, boundaries, and supporting each other through tough times. We're talking about starting a family of our own soon, and I'm excited to break the cycle of toxicity and create a loving, healthy home for our future children. It's been a challenging journey, but I'm hopeful for what lies ahead. Thank you all for your support and advice throughout this process. It's made a world of difference.